Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're pulling back the curtain on something, well, incredibly pervasive, yet it often operates just beneath the surface of our awareness. We're talking about the intertwined dynamics of global corruption and social privilege. We're drawing from a truly insightful source today, Dmitrii Gorbatenko's The Intertwined Dynamics of Global Corruption and Social Privilege, an analytical report. Our mission really is to unpack how these two powerful forces don't just coexist, but actually actively fuel each other, shaping our world in ways you might not even realize. This isn't about fleeting headlines. It's about deeply rooted systems. Okay, let's get into this.
Right. So maybe the best place to start is definitions. Let's establish our terms. While the concept of corruption is, widely recognized, it actually lacks a single universal definition. Transparency International, for instance, broadly defines it as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. Simple enough. But the World Bank narrows that down to abuse of public office, while the OECD expands it to include both public and private office. So a bit of variation there. Interestingly, the UN Convention Against Corruption, UNCAC, takes a more pragmatic route. Instead of one big definition, it lists specific criminal offenses, things like bribery, embezzlement, sure, but also, money laundering.
Okay, so it's not just a simple case of a few bad apples then. That's what I'm hearing. It sounds like academic views have really evolved to see corruption as much more systemic, almost like a cooperation problem, deeply embedded in institutional structures, power dynamics, even how information flows. So list an individual ethical failing and more structural pathology, is that right?
Precisely. It's fundamentally about the system itself. Now, let's talk privilege. This refers to those, unearned special advantages, benefits, and access to resources that certain groups receive, not because of their effort or talent, but just due to their social identities. And the source really emphasizes it's intrinsically linked with oppression, like two sides of the same coin.
What's really striking to me about privilege, though, is that it often operates completely outside the awareness of the people who benefit from it. How does that lack of awareness, that invisibility, actually shape the problem we're discussing? It's been described as disconsciousness, this sort of uncritical habit of mind that justifies inequities just by accepting the status quo as natural, like an invisible knapsack of unearned assets people carry around without realizing it. I mean, if so many advantages are unseen, how do we even begin to address that?
It's a profound point, that invisibility.
Yeah.
And it's also not monolithic. Privilege isn't. Privilege theory really emphasizes intersectionality. So you can be privileged in some aspects of your identity, maybe race or gender, while being disadvantaged in others. Think of, say, a cisgender male nurse. Benefits from gender privilege, sure, but might be a numerical minority in his profession. And the domains of privilege have really expanded beyond just race and gender. We're talking sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, age, ability, religion, education. It's broad.
Okay, so we've defined them separately. But the real power here in this report is seeing how they intertwine. What happens when these two forces meet?
Well, the research strongly indicates a symbiotic relationship, almost parasitic, you could say. Pre-existing privileges, social, economic, political encryption, they create fertile ground for corruption to take root. Then the proceeds from that corruption, they loop back to reinforce and expand those very advantages for the already powerful groups. A prime example is something called elite capture.
Elite capture.
Right. Yeah, where public resources get biased for the benefit of a select few with superior social status. And this often happens through practices that are technically legal, or at least ambiguously legal, things like non-competitive contracts or excessive pricing.
And state capture sounds even more, aggressive than that. This is where powerful elites, maybe large multinational companies, actually manipulate the rules of the game. Institutional decision-making, laws, public bids, all for their own enrichment. It effectively transforms governance into a transactional enterprise where political loyalty, not public need, dictates how funds are allocated. That has huge implications for how your public money gets spent, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And it's not just a domestic issue either. The global financial architecture, with wealthy nations and their sophisticated institutions, the lawyers, the bankers, accountants, they often facilitate the world's costliest forms of corruption. So corruption isn't contained by borders. It's really a transnational problem, often enabled by these huge global financial networks.
Okay, let's dive deeper then. Let's look at the specific forms these phenomena take. The report mentions a framework, the Unbundled Corruption Index. Sounds useful.
Yes, it is. It categorizes corruption into 4 distinct types. First, there's petty theft. Think street-level bureaucrats taking small bribes, an official demanding a little extra payment for a routine permit, that kind of thing. Then there's grand theft. This is your larger scale embezzlement or misappropriation by political elites. Big money. Next is speed money. These are those smaller bribes, often petty, just meant to expedite processes, sometimes seen as a sort of painkiller for slow bureaucracy, but it's still an unofficial cost to you. And finally, and this one's really key, there's access money.
Access money.
Right. This involves high-stakes rewards going to powerful officials for exclusive, valuable privileges.
So this is where those lines really blur, isn't it? Maybe the most insidious form. It means corruption isn't just about, envelopes of cash. It's about how powerful players can legally or quasi-legally rig the system for their benefit. Think about the implications for your public policy or your access to fair markets when that happens. The source even notes different regime types affect which forms dominate, like China might have lower petty corruption, but it's apparently rife with cronyism and that elite-level access money. So it's not always the obvious stuff.
Exactly. It's subtle sometimes.
Yeah.
Now, moving to political corruption specifically, it's defined basically as the use of powers by government officials for illegitimate private gain. This covers classic bribery, sure, but also influence peddling, nepotism favoring family,
Right.
cronyism favoring friends, and graft. There's a memorable example in the report, the Countess Golden Toilet case in Lithuania.
A golden toilet.
Well, maybe not literally gold, but a public toilet that costs an astonishing 150,000 euro.
Wow. A toilet for 150,000 euro.
Mm-hmm.
That almost sounds absurd, but I guess that absurdity really underscores the scale and maybe the brazenness of some of these acts.
It really does. And then there's state capture, which we touched on. That's when powerful elites manipulate the actual institutions and laws for their benefit. We've seen links to this in tragic events, like the Novi Sad railway station collapse in Serbia, apparently linked to corruption, or Hungary's stadium mania, where huge public funds get diverted to, let's say, questionable large-scale projects. In the U.S. context, the report mentions iron triangles.
Iron triangles.
Yeah, those mutually beneficial relationships between special interests, congressional committees, and federal regulators. They serve as a powerful example of how elite capture functions to kind of maintain the status quo for insiders.
These examples make the impact so real, don't they? Weakened democracy, reduced investment in public services we all need, distorted public spending, and even tragic infrastructure failures that directly impact people's lives. And it's not just contained within borders, as you said.
Yeah.
British MPs getting gifts from foreign entities, or Dubai acting as a hub for illicit financial flows. It really highlights that transnational reach.
Mm-hmm. And then we have economic and bureaucratic corruption. This directly hits financial systems and public services. This category includes things like embezzlement, theft, fraud, think misdirecting company funds or skimming foreign aid. Public procurement, buying goods and services with public money is a particularly high-risk area. You see irregularities like favoring certain suppliers, avoiding competitive bidding, or inflating prices after a contract is awarded. And the source notes that emergency spending, like during the COVID-19 pandemic, significantly increased these risks.
So this isn't just abstract numbers disappearing. It actively distorts public spending. It leads to underinvestment in critical areas like education and health, which directly harms human capital, future generations. It also discourages foreign investment, makes businesses wary, and it absolutely exacerbates income inequality. It hits the poor and vulnerable hardest, right? Because they often pay the highest percentage of their income in bribes just to get basic services.
Exactly. Which brings us to the sources and beneficiaries of all this. Corruption tends to stem from weak institutions, a lack of transparency and accountability, information and power imbalances, and, well, the pursuit of personal interests over the public good. Tax havens, for instance, are critical enablers. They provide the secrecy needed for large-scale political corruption, hiding illicit funds. And who benefits? Well, disproportionately, it's those already in positions of power, public officials, certain private sector firms, well-connected individuals, high-income groups, powerful elites.
Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index, the CPI, gives us a pretty stark global picture of this, doesn't it? In 2024, Denmark was seen as least corrupt, topping the list. Down at the bottom were South Sudan and Somalia. The global average score was, well, pretty dismal, 43 out of 100, with over two-thirds of countries scoring below 50. That's not great. The U.S., for example, scored 65. A slight decline, which the report partly attributes to perceived ethics scandals at its Supreme Court.
Yeah, that data really underscores how existing privilege can enable corruption, and then the corruption, in turn, reinforces that privilege, widening the socioeconomic gap for everyone else. It's a vicious cycle.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about how corruption manifests. Let's shift focus a bit more squarely onto privilege itself. It's not just about money or political power, is it? It seems deeply woven into our social fabric across many different dimensions.
Absolutely. Social privilege is deeply rooted in various identities. Take race and ethnicity. The report discusses white privilege, offering tangible advantages like data showing white individuals are significantly more likely to get a housing loan than people of color, even with the same financial history. It also manifests subtly, just the general assumption that white people are inherently law-abiding, for example. And historical educational racism, things like the Black Codes in the US or the Canadian Indian residential schools, created these persistent generational opportunity gaps. Then there's male privilege or patriarchy. It grants unearned advantages. Men are consistently overrepresented in leadership roles, earn more on average. And disturbingly, women are disproportionately exposed to certain corrupt practices, including sextortion, especially in sectors like healthcare and education.
Wow. And it extends beyond race and gender, too, right? Sexual orientation.
hmm Heterosexual privilege. Just the pervasive societal assumption that everyone is heterosexual and how society is structured around that norm. Able-bodied privilege makes navigating daily life easier without constantly thinking about accessibility. Even age and religious affiliation can grant unearned benefits. Older workers might get passed over for opportunities, or dominant religions see their practices reflected in public holidays while others don't.
The report also mentioned something fascinating, passing.
Yes, passing the ability to appear to belong to a more privileged group, that itself is a significant privilege. It's often sort of celebrated uncritically in media. For instance, a straight white actor might get praised for portraying a queer or disabled character,
Right.
while actors who actually have those identities often get fewer roles or accolades. Hollywood, for example, casts Caucasian characters in something like 82% of lead roles, according to the source.
It's clear these identities don't exist in isolation either. They combine in complex ways, like white men often have greater access to power than white women, showing that intersection of gender and race very clearly.
Precisely. Now, economic privileges are often more apparent, maybe because they're tied more directly to resources. Higher socioeconomic status translates pretty directly into better access, quality education, superior health care, influential networks. The source details inherited privilege through different mechanisms. There's cultural capital, those non-financial assets like knowledge, behavior, skills that promote social mobility. There are inter vivos transfers, basically, gifts given during life, maybe for college tuition or a house deposit, and transfers of bulk estates, your classic inheritance upon death. These are really profound mechanisms for intergenerational advantage.
And then there are those government-granted privileges that actively distort markets. Things like giving a company monopoly status or favorable regulations, subsidies, targeted tax breaks. The report uses a historical example. Railroads bribing officials way back when for monopoly franchises, and even influencing the regulators meant to oversee them. It vividly shows how political power creates economic advantages that are, well, functionally equivalent to corruption, even if they stay within the letter of the law.
Exactly. And finally, political privileges. These involve unearned advantages in influencing and shaping political decisions. This includes direct access to leaders' think lobbying, campaign contributions. It includes shaping laws and policies, which is essentially state capture territory again, and even influencing or controlling public discourse. That iron triangle dynamic in the U.S. is a classic example of this political privilege in action.
So political privilege seems to kind of lock everything else in place. It ensures other forms of privilege are maintained, maybe even expanded. It creates this vicious feedback loop we talked about. And when political loyalty, not public need, dictates where funds go, it fundamentally undermines democracy, doesn't it? And it erodes public trust, making it incredibly difficult for you, the citizen, to demand justice or just see your tax dollars used effectively.
Right. So addressing these deeply entrenched issues, it demands a truly multifaceted approach. There's no single silver bullet. On the international level, the UNCSC, the UN Convention Against Corruption, is crucial. It's a legally binding instrument adopted by 191 parties now. It focuses on prevention, criminalization, international cooperation, and importantly, asset recovery, getting stolen assets back. Then there's the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention. This one specifically criminalizes the bribery of foreign public officials. It focuses on the supply side of bribery. It apparently boasts a gold standard monitoring mechanism, which has led to sanctions in over 500 high-profile cases. These frameworks show a vital shift, moving beyond just punishing individuals towards trying to achieve systemic reform.
And domestically, strengthening anti-corruption regimes is absolutely vital too. But it means more than just passing laws, right? It's about building the capacity to actually investigate and prosecute prosecute effectively. Transparency, accountability, oversight, these are critical. Everything from how budgets are made public to strict codes of conduct for public officials, ensuring merit-based appointments.
hmm And public procurement reforms are particularly high impact, just given the sheer sums of money involved globally.
Yeah.
Fostering genuine competition, ensuring accessibility for all firms, including SMEs, minority-owned businesses, that's key. Things like whistleblower protection and mandatory asset disclosure for public officials are also essential tools in this fight.
But making these reforms actually work, that seems like a massive challenge, doesn't it? Legal changes often aren't enough if you don't have the enforcement capacity on the ground. You've got political interference, fierce resistance from entrenched elites who benefit from the way things are, and real difficulties with transnational cases getting evidence across borders, gaps in international law. It sounds tough.
Absolutely. It is tough. And we can't overlook the crucial role of civil society, independent media, and grassroots movements in all this. CSOs, civil society organizations, they're vital for raising public awareness, contributing to policy debates, monitoring implementation on the ground, investigative journalism. It unearths wrongdoing. Think Watergate. It holds powerful individuals accountable in ways official channels sometimes can't or won't.
Yeah. And grassroots movements. They mobilize communities, they amplify marginalized voices, push back against discrimination, against state-sanctioned violence sometimes. The report mentioned anonymous reporting platforms like Uwajibikaji Pamoja in Kenya. It shows how technology can empower these efforts too.
Definitely. However, these groups themselves often face huge challenges. Limited funding is a big one, intense political interference, and very real threats to their safety, particularly for whistleblowers and activists on the front lines.
So it's not just about knowing what to do, but figuring out how to do it in the face of these immense obstacles. Plus, we still have to contend with those ambiguously legal forms of corruption that access money we talked about. Very hard to target with traditional anti-bribery laws. And that lack of awareness by beneficiaries of privilege, that makes getting broad societal buy-in for real systemic change a serious uphill battle.
Yeah. I think what we've explored today really underscores that corruption and social privilege are, well, they're profoundly intertwined. They're mutually reinforcing. They don't just exist side by side. They actively erode public trust. They undermine democratic institutions, distort economic development, and they disproportionately burden marginalized communities and impact human rights across the globe.
So combating these issues clearly requires a multifaceted approach. It has to be adaptive, globally coordinated. It seems it's about dismantling the underlying structures that perpetuate unearned advantage and illicit gain, not just, whack-a-mole with individual acts of wrongdoing. Which leads to a final thought, maybe for you listening. If privilege is so often invisible to those who hold it, and if functionally corrupt practices are frequently legal, what does that mean for our collective ability to truly see and then challenge the systems that perpetuate inequality in our world? What stands out to you from this deep dive? We really hope this exploration of Dmitrii Gorbatenko's report has given you some profound new insights, or at least some things to think about. Until next time, keep digging, keep questioning, and keep learning.